on the outside agitators who were present, and there is some documentation and lists of names of people who were believed to be, for example, Brown Berets and others, and there is some documentation about where these different groups were coming from. Apparently they came from all up and down the state, and there is a lot of information about that. But it's more an accounting. There's no necessary criticism of them that appears as you described.
Do you have any quotes that you could give us? When you asked Mr. Wilson what happened, whether he knew Salazar, whether he was targeting Salazar, what did he just give you simple no, no, no's, or what was?
He gave me simple no, no, no's. But what he did do is, as indicated in our report, he did elaborate on how he discovered that that the individual inside the bar had been killed. And what he says about that, and what he told me about that, was that after he fired the tear gas canister into the bar, he realized that there was a tactical mistake. That is, no one was covering the back. So he runs to the back of the bar, which is where everyone was coming out of, except for Mr. Salazar. He runs to the back and starts to try to identify who it was who was in the bar, who wasn't in the bar. He wasn't so successful on that because no one was covering the bar, and there were lots of people milling about the alley. That being said, he did discover a man in the back of the bar who appeared to have teary eyes and was holding a gun. He believed, but could not prove, that this man had been in the bar. He had a conversation with this man. Another deputy came up during that conversation and told Mr. Wilson that this individual was actually the owner of the bar, and so was not culpable, probably didn't need to be stopped or detained or arrested. So Mr. Wilson let him go, kept the gun. Several hours later, according to what Mr. Wilson told me, he is encountered by a Spanish speaker, he and another deputy. The Spanish speaker tells him somebody's been injured. He believes either in the alley or the bar, he's not sure. And he tells that individual, bring this man out and we'll give him first aid. He remembers distinctly, he said as if it was yesterday, that shortly thereafter the man comes back and starts yelling, muerte, muerte, muerte. Mr. Wilson's first belief is that he has just released an individual who has killed somebody in the bar, meaning the man who was in the back. That ends up not being true. 2 hours later, when he's debriefed by homicide, he learns that it was he that fired the fatal blow. That's what he told me.
May I also add that those people with the gun was not the owner of the bar. The owner of the bar, in fact, came hours later looking for his weapon, which was a rifle. So
You're absolutely correct, sir. Absolutely.
So,
he ended up not being the owner of the bar. The owner of the bar comes later, actually gets entree into the bar, pulls out a rifle, but doesn't see, unfortunately, Mr. Salazar. Comes out, and it's only a couple hours after that that Mr. Salazar is finally discovered. By the way, even though Mr. Salazar was killed instantaneously by this missile, it was a whole host of errors that contributed to, I think, this unfortunate incident. By that I mean 3 hours or more went by before the sheriff's department went into the bar and found Mr. Salazar. If he had not been killed instantly, just think about how much more horrible this incident would be, but he was. That being said, they had a responsibility to be at the ready. If you're going to fire tear gas into a bar, you have to be at the ready with your own masks so that you can then go in and clear the bar if necessary. Mr. Wilson nor his reinforcements or his colleagues had a gas mask, and so decided, well, we can't go in because we don't have gas masks, and so we're not going to clear it. We'll just assume everybody went out the back door. Bad assumption.
Did Strickle tell them at the scene that any deputies, that his boss was in there? Because that's what he says, and he's told me that again this morning.
Yes, and he does say that, and he does say that in the interviews in which are captured. Yes, and what he says is that he was ignored.
Right. That's what
And they were busy with other things and just sort of ignored him, and that's unfortunate. One problem with the homicide investigation is that there was absolutely no follow-up on that. There was absolutely no follow-up on that.
So who was the guy with the
We don't know whether he was inside the bar. And
Did you see anything about the gun in their files?
yeah, there is some mention of the guy with the gun in the files. I'm not sure he was identified.
He turned out to be, thinking, the owner of a neighboring business.
Julie, please state your name and spell your last name.
Julie Ruhlin, Ruhlin.
So do we know who reported the man with the gun?
Yes, we do. And his name is in the documents, and there's an extensive workup on his background, et cetera, that are in the materials. His name has been identified, and he was interviewed. He testified at the inquest, yes.
Was he a law enforcement officer?
He was, based on the information in the boxes, he used to be a reserve officer for LAPD. By that I mean, reserve officer's a volunteer officer. They don't get paid. I think they get $1 a year. But he was a reserve officer. He was let go by LAPD years prior to this incident.
For, having some,
He had some issues, yeah, that are identified in the boxes.
Was there anything in the boxes about the 2 other people that died that day that?
Yeah, there are some reports about others that died. There was a deputy involved shooting during this incident, in which somebody in a vehicle allegedly was coming at the deputies and they fired and killed him.
What was his name?
I don't know. It's in the boxes. I can get it for you if you're that interested. But there is some reference to that, but almost no investigation into that from what we can tell.
Did the deputies order them back into the bar? This has been a question all along.
There are witnesses that say, and we don't have an answer for this, it still is a mystery to us, but there are witnesses who say, and we have no reason to disbelieve these witnesses, that prior to the tear gas canister being shot into the bar, some deputies ordered some individuals out on the street into the bar, and that's how they ended up in the bar. We don't know whether this significantly predated in time the actual shoot into the bar. Perhaps Mr. Wilson wasn't on scene when that was done. Perhaps at that time the deputies hadn't been alerted to the fact that there might have been guns in the bar by the man in the red vest. But I just gave you a lot of perhapses, and I wish that those questions had been more thoroughly plumbed back then so we'd have answers, because we don't.
What was the length of time between their ordering the bar empty, people to come out, and the time that he fired the tear gas?
Do you know?
Couple minutes.
Couple as in?
That's what, deputies reported, that they gave, their deputies reported they gave commands over, they estimated a minute or 2. And then, Deputy Wilson fired his rounds into the bar. As he ran, around to the back of the bar, a sergeant also responded to reports that he had heard over the radio of, people going into the bar with weapons. And he also, he gave commands over his loudspeaker. Lots of witnesses on the street report hearing those. And then he fired a couple of tear gas rounds into the bar as well.
You mean a bullhorn?
Yeah,
Loudspeaker, you mean a bullhorn?
I think it was a
Portable.
PA system on his, in his radio car.
On the car. And so, what about the first order to get out? Was that by a bullhorn, or was that?
No, those were just deputies shouting them out into the bar.
Did a deputy ever enter the bar and say that, or is this shouting from the sidewalk?
There are no reports that a deputy entered the bar to say that, no. And in fact, you know, if the concern is that there's a man with a rifle waiting inside the bar, just entering the bar to give a command wouldn't really be the tactically sound way to do it.
How do you know he got into
The coroner's report says it. The tear gas canister is it's a really large projectile, and it struck him in the head. It was a massive injury to his head, and it's pretty clear from the autopsy records that it had to have been instant.
How many people were in the bar?
Somewhere between 7 and 12, I think.